Hello, I am Peter Okwacha. Welcome to Focus on Africa, our top stories. No hiding from justice. We speak to the man leading the prosecution of Felicien Kabuga, arrested over the Rwandan genocide after 26 years on the run. Tourism returns to Tanzania, but just how confident are travelers and locals that they are safe from COVID-19? It's been touted as a possible treatment for COVID-19, but the World Health Organization suspends trials of hydroxychloroquine over serious safety concerns. Also on the program, he's a walking hero. Find out how much Ghanaian war veteran Private Joseph Hammond has raised for Africa's coronavirus frontline. Thanks for joining us here on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. For more than a quarter of a century, he hid from justice. But earlier this month, Rwanda's most wanted man, Felicien Kabuga, was arrested for crimes relating to the massacre of 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus in Rwanda in 1994. The 84-year-old was tracked down to an apartment in a Paris suburb where he was living under a false identity using a passport from an unidentified African country. Mr. Kabuga had been on the run for so long that the international tribunal set up to bring those responsible for the genocide to justice had stopped working. But that didn't deter Serge Bramert, a UN war crimes prosecutor, who finally hunted him down. Well, Serge Bramert, chief prosecutor of the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals, joins me now from The Hague. Thanks a lot for talking to us. Why and how did Mr. Kabuga evade justice for more than 20 years?
Well, good evening. Indeed, it has been taken 26 years between his indictment and the arrest. He had, of course, during a number of years, support and protection, and he had put in place a quite sophisticated network of supporters helping him escaping for so long.
You say he got some protection from some quarters. Do we know where that protection came from?
Well, the investigations are still ongoing, but we have 20 different alias names he has used. We have 4 different passports which have been issued to him over the years. So obviously he has had some support, definitely in the early years, but this group of persons surrounding him became smaller and smaller over the years.
Now, how did you manage to track him down? It was 26 years, such a long time, but how did you manage? I understand that, his kids were involved in this as well, unknowingly?
Well, when I took over the responsibility for the mechanism, which included the hunt for the remaining fugitives a little bit more than 3 years ago, I put a different team in place. I brought in one of the team leaders, Bob Reed, who is a colleague who worked with me also when we were at the ICTY, where we arrested Karadzic and Mladic in 2008 and 2011. And we really used similar strategies, deciding to be not reactive as the teams were more in the past working on informants and informations, but to become much more proactive. So we went back to the place where we were sure he had been seen for the last time, and that was in Germany in 2007, where he went for surgery. So our case theory was that very likely he hadn't left Europe since 2007. So with my team, I put a task force in place, which indeed included not only my team members, but also colleagues from the UK, from France, from Belgium, from the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, and Luxembourg. And we really tried to follow the movements of the persons of interest. And by doing the necessary phone analysis, financial analysis, and analysis of movements, we concluded that it was very likely that he was in Belgium, the UK, or in France. And 1 month ago, we managed to locate the area, the streets in Paris, where most likely he was hiding. And we had excellent support from the French authorities in this regard. and very quickly an operation was set up, also somehow taking advantage of the lockdown.
Mr. Brammertz, I mean, given that so much time has passed and given his age is 84 now, I believe, there are those who wonder whether justice will be served.
You know, we take this step by step. A few months ago, no one would have expected that ever Kabuga would be arrested. Today, he has been arrested. He is in detention, and it's an extremely important moment for survivors and victims. I've seen overwhelming reactions over the last days. Of course, he has an advanced age. Of course, it will not be easy to update the investigation, to put the case together, and to have a trial. But, you know, we will do our best to make sure that a trial can take place.
And just very briefly, if you would, sir, there are those who say that given the fact that these crimes were committed in Rwanda, that he should be transferred back to Rwanda to face trial. I mean, should the Rwandan government seek his extradition, do you think this should be granted?
Well, I fully understand the interest by victims' organizations, survivors, who are indeed publicly asking for this trial to take place in the country where the crimes have been committed. Now, the legal situation today is a different one. The only jurisdiction which has competence to deal with this case is the mechanism for international tribunal. So today there is only one option. It is for France to transfer Kabuga to the mechanism, and in principle, a trial will take place at the mechanism. Of course, it will be up to the judges, it will be up to the Security Council to decide if other options will be open, but under the current legal situation, the only jurisdiction is the mechanism.
And we know that there's still a few of those accused of being responsible for this genocide who are still on the run. Will you still be going after them?
Definitely. We have still a number of ongoing investigations in relation to other fugitives. We are fully aware that it is a kind of momentum we are trying to use. There are a number of countries which are not providing the cooperation we are hoping for. We have a number of requests for assistance with a number of countries who have not answered those requests for more than a year. We hope that this situation will change and that countries which have been reluctant to cooperate will take an additional and make an additional effort to finally bring those last fugitives to justice.
Okay, Serge Brammertz, thank you very much for your insight into this story.
You're most welcome.
Now, for several weeks, truck drivers at the Kenya-Tanzania border have been tested for coronavirus before they cross, leading to long delays. But there's new worry, growing concern that the drivers could be spreading the virus among the local communities on both sides of the Namanga border as they wait for their results. And as the BBC's Ferdinand Omondi reports from the border, the different approach and attitude towards the virus from the two countries is also playing out amongst residents of the border towns.
Here at the Kenya-Tanzania border in Namanga, a stark contrast in the way of life. In Kenya, there are existing restrictions, a dusk-dawn curfew. People by law are required to observe social distance and wear protective gear in public, like the mask that I'm wearing. On the Tanzania side, they tell me all they need to do is to listen to advice from the government. So the pubs are open, the restaurants are open, and people basically mingling whichever way they want. And at the border post, where there are these restrictions, it is the truck drivers who are suffering the most. They have to be tested before they can be allowed to enter into Kenya. And I was speaking to some drivers, some who say they have taken as long as 8 days waiting to be tested and for that confirmation to be done. And during this waiting period, the drivers tell me their movement is unrestricted. And many of the people who I spoke to, especially on the Kenyan side, say that this unrestricted movement could be contributing to the spread of coronavirus at the border. Testing is restricted mainly to the truck drivers and the customs officials dealing with them. And a huge concern for the locals is that when mass testing begins here, then the figures could virtually explode.
Tanzania is ready to welcome tourists from all over the world with open arms. That's the message President John Magufuli wants potential visitors to hear. Mr. Magufuli says COVID-19 infections in the country have gone down and is inviting people to come in. He also says no foreign visitor will be subjected to 14 days quarantine. This has caused some criticism both within and outside the country, with the African Tourism Board calling for caution. The BBC's Abubakar Famau has been following this closely and he joins me now. Abubakar, what's been the general reaction in Tanzania that the government is opening the country to tourists?
Actually, I will tell you, this has been received with open hands by majority of stakeholders in the tourism sector. Tourism is the largest or second largest employer in Tanzania after agriculture. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, so much has been paralyzed, I will say. Hotels have been shut. Travel agencies have been closed. And also tour operators have, had stopped working. So this news, and having known that some tourists have started coming in, especially today, we are having reports that around 40, tourists from America have come in Tanzania by private jets. So this news has been received with open arms. I can say people they feel like now it's a sigh of relief to see that business and other activities are coming back to normal.
Indeed, Abubakar, and we're seeing pictures of that plane which is making the rounds on social media this afternoon of those tourists arriving in the country. But how is the government planning to protect its citizens from being exposed to potentially contagious visitors?
I will say normal precautions, but I also managed to speak to one of the officials at one of the national parks here in Tanzania today. And he told me that they are going to abide by normal precautions that are being, advocated by WHO and also the health ministry. And these ones include, social distancing, wearing of masks, and also using sanitizers, but at the same time limiting the time that their employees will be working. So these are some of the precautions that are going to be taken.
And Abubakar, there's also the issue of the island state of Zanzibar, which has taken a completely different direction from mainland Tanzania concerning COVID-19. Will these tourists be able to travel to Zanzibar if they so wish?
Zanzibar too is now trying, to ease some of its restrictions that they initially installed. And I believe that some of those, the easing of those restrictions will include allowing tourists coming from other countries directly to Zanzibar, but also those coming from, through the mainland.
Okay, Abubakar Famau, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for speaking to us there live from Dar es Salaam. Let's take a quick look now at other stories making the headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. More than 40,000 Zimbabweans have been arrested for violating coronavirus lockdown restrictions. Most were arrested for breaking the rule of not moving more than 5 kilometers from their homes. Others failed to wear masks or kept their businesses open. Most informal trading is banned, causing a great financial hardship for millions. President Emmerson Mnangagwa last week extended the lockdown indefinitely. Egypt's health minister has ordered an investigation into the death of a doctor who contracted coronavirus while on duty amid rising concern about the number of health workers dying of the disease. The doctors' union said it held officials responsible for the deaths of 19 doctors and the infection of more than 350 others. Doctors have increasingly complained about the lack of protective equipment and testing for themselves and their patients. The Americas are the new epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic. That's according to the World Health Organization, who say now is not the time for restrictions to be eased. They are warning that outbreaks are accelerating in countries such as Brazil, which currently has the most cases in the world after the United States. The number of deaths reported in Brazil last week was the highest for a 7-day period. The World Health Organization has temporarily halted the testing of the drug hydroxychloroquine as a possible treatment for COVID-19 because of safety concerns. It comes after a study suggested the drug could cause heart problems and might even increase deaths amongst patients with the disease. Several African countries, including Nigeria, Cameroon and Senegal, had been using HCQ to treat patients, while in Uganda, President Museveni called it an effective solution to the coronavirus challenge. Imogen Fuchs reports from Geneva.
There are so far no known treatments or vaccines for COVID-19, but there are many clinical trials of many different drugs to try to find them. One drug, hydroxychloroquine, is already in use as a treatment for malaria. Some, among them President Donald Trump, think it could work against COVID-19 too. He's even taking it himself.
Hydroxychloroquine? I'm taking it, hydroxychloroquine. When? Right now, yeah. A couple of weeks ago, I started taking it. Because I think it's good. I've heard a lot of good stories.
The World Health Organization has repeatedly said there is no scientific evidence so far that hydroxychloroquine can treat COVID-19, let alone prevent infection with it. The WHO had been running clinical trials to test anecdotal reports that it might be beneficial. Now those trials have been stopped after a study suggested the drug could cause heart problems and might even increase deaths among COVID-19 patients.
The executive group has implemented a temporary pause of the hydroxychloroquine arm within the Solidarity trial while the safety data is reviewed by the Data Safety Monitoring Board.
The WHO said the decision to suspend trials was a precautionary measure. Now it will gather more data on safety before deciding whether to continue testing. However, it said patients taking hydroxychloroquine for established reasons, such as malaria, should continue to do so. Imogen Fuchs, BBC News, Geneva.
This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Peter Okwoche. Still to come on the programme, who needs a steeplechase track to train on, even if you're an Olympic champion, when you can build one at home? I'm Peter Okwoche. You're watching Focus on Africa. Now, one of the new realities that has developed as a result of the coronavirus pandemic is that we are relying on the internet more than ever. Whether it's individuals working from home, businesses trying to ensure continuity, or governments using apps and new technologies to help prevent the spread of the disease. Now, the World Bank says countries across the continent have to do more to increase connectivity or risk being left behind once the world economy eventually recovers. My colleague Lukwesa Burak spoke to Maktir Diop, Vice President of the World Bank, responsible for infrastructure and digital development. He explained how serious the problem is for Africa and how the World Bank plans to help.
We need by 2030 to connect 1.1 billion new users in Africa. And we estimate about $100 billion what it needs to be invested to achieve that objective. We are talking about 250,000 4G base stations and about 250,000 fiber optic. All this seems very technical numbers, but it means that our infrastructure is missing a lot in Africa and a lot of people are not connected. Much of the connectivity on broadband is done through mobile. And most of the people in Africa have access only to 3G and now do not have access to 4G. So we have launched a big initiative called Digital Economy. And the objective is to accelerate that connectivity and to support countries to have economic activities around connectivity. Because it's not only to lay down the infrastructure, but to create the jobs that will be using those infrastructure. That is also to connect the social infrastructure like school would need that to be able to be part of this 21st century. Just picture a country without connectivity today. You cannot trade, you cannot access to basic services, you cannot get the basic services that are needed for you to carry your business and to be integrated in the world economy.
In terms of providing increased resilience, How long is that going to take to achieve? Is it just during COVID-19 pandemic, or are you looking more long-term?
COVID-19 is a trigger, because until recently, some people were telling us, why do you talk so much about connectivity in Africa? These are poor countries. They have different needs, which are not the needs of developed countries. Connectivity, broadband is a luxury. Today, it's clear that it's not true. That without connectivity, you cannot export your good because your global value chain is totally disturbed. Today, we have seen the impact of the coronavirus on the connectivity, on global value chain, on access to electricity, because a lot of the electricity supply now relies a lot on digital, particularly if we want to have programs outside the large cities. And we see that all this has been disturbed. We have put in place some programs in the agriculture sector which rely on access to internet, like e-voucher, which allow farmers to buy services, to know world prices. All these without a proper level of connectivity, one's gonna do it. So we have an opportunity now to shift, to move us from a situation where it was just small pockets in country which were accessing those services, to have a large number of the population accessing services by accelerating the program of investment.
From the sounds of it, in terms of meeting the immediate challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, is this just providing the finances to access what's there, or are we talking about hardware?
This is a priority, because if you don't have one, you're going to do the other. If you don't have broadband access, it's a time when you will still have to keep social distancing for a while, because we haven't found yet the vaccine. You will not be able to have the economic recovery that you expect. So one is very complementary to the other, because it's a new way of doing business. A good example is what we are doing today. If you think about the entertainment industry, if you think about all this industry, so we have to think about a different way of doing business. And that is a different way of doing business, which make it an obligation to country to invest very heavily on digital. It's not anymore an option. It's part of the package to move your economic forward.
Makta Diop, Vice President with the World Bank. Now, many of the world's elite sports people have had to improvise to stay fit during lockdown. Amongst them is Kenyan athlete Conseslus Kipruto, the Olympic and two-time world 3,000 meter steeplechase champion, was hoping to compete at the Tokyo Games. But to keep up his training, he's using household items to create a homemade steeplechase track. Take a look.
My name is Conseslus Kipruto, world and Olympic 3,000 meter steeplechase champion. This year was to win Olympics for a second time. Now I have to wait until next year. But I have to stay fit and ready. Let me show you how I'm staying fit at home. No barriers, no problem. To my fellow athletes, let's observe comment and refuge. Train alone. Wash your hands regularly. We will be back on track soon. Thank you.
Interesting stuff. Now let's update you on Joseph Hammond, the World War II veteran from Ghana, who set himself a challenge of walking 2 miles every day for a week to raise money for COVID-19 frontline workers and vulnerable veterans. Well, at the end of the 7 days, the 95-year-old has raised over $19,000 so far and has walked over 14 miles. Private Hammond says he was inspired by a British veteran fundraiser, Colonel Sir Tom Moore. That's it on Focus on Africa for tonight. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.